So welcome everybody. I know it's the end of the day. Welcome everybody online. My name is Mike Boyle, and we have some other guests I'm going to introduce as well. I just wanted to say thanks for being here. It's been a wonderful 2 days, hearing about all the different advances. I think what we talked about for this session was actually to make it somewhat interactive. I know I talked to you guys for 20 minutes or half an hour yesterday, so I didn't want to give another presentation. But what I wanted to do was to make this an interactive session, so if there's questions that people had or specific things that they were interested in terms of trials or truthfully just about anything, we can talk about that. But also to introduce Patty Burks, who's our Director of Research, Clinical Trials Affairs at the Foundation, and Ali Sue Patterson, who also works on the clinical trials team and leads a lot of our communication efforts regarding clinical trials. And so I was thinking about going around the room and meeting all you guys, but that might be a little rough for the people online. So let's, we'll do that a little bit later on. If we're doing talking, it would be great to make sure you introduce yourself so that we can hear where everybody's from. But I'm going to actually, before we start diving into some of the details about clinical trials and give some update there, I wanted to hear about some other aspects of clinical trials. One of the things that it's easy to focus on the pipeline and what are some of the new trials, and we can talk all about that. But one of the things that the Foundation has spent a lot of effort on is trying to make sure that we can enroll trials, right? Because if companies feel like they can't get trials done, or if the trials that we're sponsoring don't get done, all that momentum goes away. And that tends to make companies go away. It tends to not advance medicines and therapies as fast. So a big part of that has been trying to think about how we can build up our research network. We can talk some about that, as well as to include patients and families in this whole effort. So, and I see Christina Roman here, who's also part of this effort and has been part of our team in the past. But let's start with Patty Burks. So Patty, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what you do related to clinical trials?
Okay, hi everyone. Is it okay if I sit?
I think so, actually.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll be more informal. Hi, I'm Patty Burks, and it's great to be here. I am a nurse, and I worked as a staff nurse at a children's hospital and took care of CF patients for years. Then I became a pulmonary clinic nurse, then a CF research nurse at Washington University School of Medicine, where I did CF research clinical trials for 9 years, and then I joined the foundation. It's going to be 2 years before we know it. And so I've been at the foundation for a while, helping support the 89 clinical research sites we have across the country. But before any of that, a long time ago, what really got me into CF was that my second child, Jonathan, had cystic fibrosis. So that was my introduction to this disease. So you want Ali Sue to introduce herself?
Why don't you go ahead and do your... sure.
Okay.
Talk about your work.
Yeah.
Okay, the thing that I'm going to say what I'm most excited about.
Okay.
So I'm excited about the way we've built up the capacity of our network across the country and really around the world in the last couple of years. We did a survey a couple years ago to find out what's the biggest barrier to research sites taking on more trials. And we heard from our sites it was the research coordinator time. There just wasn't enough time for them to take on more. So the foundation did the ARC Award, the Additional Research Coordinator Award, and 91 research coordinators were added to our sites across the country, which really beefed up the capacity of those sites.
How many sites do we have?
We have 89 sites. So some sites got 2, some got none, and many got 1. That really gave the sites the bandwidth they needed in order to do the trials that we're doing right now. So I'm pretty excited about the way we have addressed the capacity issue nationally, but I'm even more excited about how we have addressed the quality of those sites. It's not just having bandwidth, but making sure that we have the best sites possible and the best people possible. And one event that I think when I think about quality is a year ago in the spring, we decided to thank everybody in our research network who has been doing CF clinical trials for 20 years or more. We're going to give them this crystal clock. I estimated 19, 20 clocks, something like that would go out. Didn't you think 20, maybe
yes.
25? We thought, it's not going to be that much, but it's going to mean a lot to the people that get one. So how many clocks did we hand out?
For 20 years of service.
For 20 years of service, we handed out 63 clocks. We have so many people in our research network that have made this, who have made CF clinical trials their life's work. And that's neat. That's really just part of what makes our sites just so full of quality. So that's one of the things I'm very excited about as well.
That's great. I'm going to ask you one or two questions before we pass. Go to Ellie. So just so everybody understands, when we talk about doing these clinical trials, many of you participate in these and you're probably familiar with it, but the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation supports 89 different medical centers around the country to have teams that can do clinical research focused on cystic fibrosis. That's actually very unusual. There's almost, actually, I'm not sure if there's any other nonprofits or disease organizations that really take this approach. As a matter of fact, I think I mentioned that maybe a week ago, I was asked by the FDA to come speak to the cardiologists, a lot of the cardiology leaders in the United States, because they're trying to reproduce what's going on with what we call our therapeutic development network. That is, building an infrastructure of some experts and research so that as these new potential therapies come along, they can get plugged right in and be tested so we can figure out as fast as possible, is this going to be helpful or not? If it is, let's move ahead. And so I will brag a little bit on Patty, is that when I came to the foundation from Johns Hopkins 2 years ago, I said, well, what we really need is, actually Cindy George was already doing a wonderful job with this, but I said it would be really nice to have somebody whose full-time job is to focus on this, and Cindy was focusing on a lot of things. And so we did a nationwide search trying to find a research coordinator who had a lot of experience, who we thought could be, in many ways, I'm not sure, is it the mom? The queen? What would it be? No, anyway, the leader of a lot of the research coordinators for across the country, because we have hundreds of them. And numerous people said, if you could get Patty Burks, she would be by far the best person to do this. And anyway, we convinced her to move to Bethesda from St. Louis, which we were very grateful for, and she's just done a marvelous job of really taking our network to the next step, building up those research coordinators and hopefully moving along these new therapies faster than ever before. So part of this we focus on, again, is infrastructure and making this network something that companies want to come into and say, hey, we can get this done because we know that we can have these expert teams already. The other part, I'd say another part, is actually thinking about, okay, how are we going to enroll these trials? And so one of these things has been to take a little different approach, and I'm going to introduce Ali Sue Patterson, who leads a lot of our clinical trials communication efforts. Ali Sue, do you want to go with that?
Yeah, this one works.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ali Sue Patterson. As Mike said, my job is sort of the mirror image of Patty. So while she is very internal facing and supports our research network, I'm responsible for communicating about the work that we're doing to the community and making sure that information about clinical research is available and as accessible as possible. So some of the things that I work on are in collaboration with our communications department, the research section of CFF.org. And if you guys haven't checked that out recently, last summer we launched 2 really cool interactive tools, a new drug development pipeline, and then a clinical trial finder, which allows you to search in a really detailed way for clinical trials that apply to you. So those 2 projects, again, thank you to Christina Roman, who's in the room, but she was the leader of those 2 projects last summer. Those 2 projects are sort of a great example of what my task is on our team, which is to listen to the community's needs and to figure out what information is not as readily available and then make it available. So other things that I work on, some of the infographics.
Alice, can I ask you a question first?
Oh, sure.
About the Clinical Trials Finder. So
yes.
We actually had looked at the Clinical Trials Finder, many of you are aware of it. I put up a slide of it when I was talking, but it's basically a place on the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation website where you can look to see where any trial is being performed. You can search. It's like going shopping for a pair of shoes on Amazon. You can search by different criteria. You can find out about where this is being done. You can directly contact teams. But we had done some baseline metrics for our previous clinical trials finder, and I think that was around 20. Do you remember the number of visits per month?
80 visits per month.
80 visits per month was our baseline.
Okay.
So we said we would like to really increase that, maybe 10, 20, 30%. At the end of the first month, after the new clinical trials finder was rolled out, do you remember how many visits there were in the first month?
Christina can probably answer this question, but I think the percent increase was 30,000%.
Yeah, it was basically because there was about 30,000 visits. Actually, it was 26,000 visits in the first month. So we decided that going from 80 to 26,000 might have been a success. We definitely had reached that increase by 10% mark.
Yeah, a cool statistic about the pipeline, too, is that it was viewed over 100,000 times in the first 6 months after we launched the revised tool. So those projects, like I said, great examples of listening to the community in terms of what information needs to be available and how we can better present it, and then doing our best to make it available. So other things you can find on cff.org or elsewhere that I'm working on, there are some cool infographics that we've developed recently that explain sort of different nitty-gritty aspects of clinical research that might not always be as clear. And they're meant to supplement those conversations that you're having in the care center with your physicians or your research coordinator. They talk about things like safety when you're participating in a trial, what it means to be a phase 1, 2, 3, or 4, how a drug reaches FDA approval, and then a brand new one that'll be available very soon, which actually explains in a little bit more detail the major CFTR mutation classes, and then what types of CFTR modulator therapies may or may not be helpful for those mutations, and gives a visual depiction of why. So that's really cool, and we're excited about that one. And then another upcoming project is this new campaign to raise awareness about clinical research. And if you guys are familiar with I Am the Key, this will be sort of a way to update and replace that campaign. And we're working with a lot of different stakeholders, both at the foundation and external, especially community members, to make sure that we're creating a campaign that resonates with people and that makes sense. And the ultimate goal there is, again, to raise awareness about clinical research, to educate people about the importance of research, and then to equip them with all the information they need to look at the research that's going on and hopefully find a trial that's right for them. And then the last thing I'll sort of plug as an introduction to my work that I'm really excited about is in partnership with Christina Rahman and others in the Community Partnerships Department, which Drew C. Borowitz spoke about during this meeting. But this community voice group is going to be a really, really crucial asset to our work because, again, we don't know, what information is missing from cff.org, for example. We want to hear from the people who use that website to learn what's missing and what they want to see and how we can better present it. So we're going to be working really closely with Community Voice to make sure that the information and the content we're putting out about research is easy to understand and that it addresses the needs of the community.
Perfect. So, let's do this. My bet is a lot of people are here because they had questions about specific areas of research. And if not, then I'm happy to talk about that. But why don't we move to some questions? So if there's anything that people have, I think there's a way that you can actually do these online as well. Let me see here. I'm going to advance the slide. I'm not sure how it goes directly to this pad, but I think that's the way you get to this if you want to sign in. But I'd rather actually just make it somebody could, if anybody wants to start off and ask a question, yes, please. Can you mind saying, let's maybe.
Yeah, do you want to pass the mic?
Yeah, let's actually.
Let me save you the trip.
Okay. Perfect. Why don't you take that out?
Okay.
Maybe people can have it. That'd be great.
I have a comment and a question.
Please, yeah. Or suggestions are great.
My comment is, I'm a CF dad. My son Alex is 22, and
where are you from?
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Right,
Sorry.
yeah.
We tried to block that part out. And I just want to comment not only to the audience, but the online audience as well, is that if we look at what's transpired in the last 5 years, it's absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it really, really is. And I think that if we look at yesterday's discussions, the competitive landscape of the key companies that are now involved in the pipeline is equally as amazing. So thank you. My question is, I think last year there was comments made that you were collaborating with the Gates Foundation on a research program that they had initiated for anti-infectives for TB, and that the intent was to study these drugs as potential candidates for the NTM arena. Has anything come out of that, and do we anticipate any anti-infectives reaching a clinical status in the near future?
Okay, it's a great question. So I'm going to dive right in. I think maybe we'll use this to talk not only about non-tuberculous mycobacteria, but maybe other difficult to treat infections, because this is always one of the most common questions that come up that say, what about this? So you're exactly right. One of the areas that we've realized that we absolutely have to sort of step into the gap in is non-tuberculous mycobacteria. So for people that aren't used to studying microbiology, the main thing you'll probably have heard about that is either Mycobacterium avium intracellulare complex, or MAC, or the other one is something called Mycobacterium abscessus. Those are the two most common types of infection, cystic fibrosis. And particularly abscessus can be very challenging. This is something that people can be on IV antibiotics for months and months, sometimes years, because it's hard to clear. And unfortunately, although there are therapies, there aren't great therapies for this, particularly for abscessus. And so, one of the strategies we've relied on sometimes in the past is we say, oh, companies will step into this, right? Because they feel like they can make money in this space. But the problem is, this isn't that common an infection, thankfully. But for the people that have it, or for the families whose loved one has it, there's no more important infection. But the reason that's important is that it's going to take a lot to get companies to come into that space, right? Because it's not like making a blood pressure medicine where they can suddenly have thousands and millions of customers. So one of the things which you mentioned was we had a strategy meeting to say how we were going to try to get new leads in this area. And so I'm going to give you a little update, and there's actually several things going on in this non-tuberculous mycobacteria. I'm going to work backwards, actually, and that's because, I'll work in the direction you said, which is starting with the Gates and some of the screening. So one of the things we do is to say, let's use the same approach that we've used for modulators. That is to try to screen, to look for new compounds, and to test in a dish what might work to treat as a better antibiotic for these, and then think about moving these forward. The one thing is that takes a while, right? Because by the time first of all, you start by trying to screen them, then you identify them, then you do some preclinical testing, then you bring them in. But the one thing it can do is it can identify very potent or very powerful compounds, as we've seen with the modulators. So, and I have to give credit to Preston Campbell on this, because I think originally his thoughts. But the Gates Foundation is actually already doing a very large screening for a very similar type of infection. Classic tuberculosis, it's the thing you think about when you think about Africa and India. It turns out that these abscessus and MAC are actually cousins. They're related to TB. So the Gates Foundation has convinced a bunch of drug companies and spent millions and millions of dollars to do screening for all of these new compounds, really with the goal of trying to treat TB in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's a big problem. But the idea was, hey, what if some of the things they found that are active also could work against the things that are tough for our patients? And it turns out that about a third of the things they find also work in that group. So what has happened is there's actually been a nice relationship built, and we've actually met several times now and have an ongoing relationship where once they screen things and they look for TB, they also take any of their leads and then they run them through a second screen to look for things which would help against abscessus or MAC, which might help people with CF with these infections. And so the truth is, right now, there are a lot of leads. There are a lot of leads, and so part of it is trying to identify, okay, which of these are the strongest to move forward. The one thing that's neat about this is if you could actually find something that had TB effects, also had some effects in abscessus, companies would find that attractive because the market's big enough. And so right now what we're at with that specific project is there's a good number of leads. It's trying to say, okay, which are the ones that we want to move forward? There's a problem if you have 200 leads. You want to actually be able to say, okay, here's the one or two or three that really look promising. or sometimes you say, here's the 10, and then what you do is you actually get the chemists to go in and they monkey with the molecule. They say, okay, how can we get it so it can be absorbed better? How can we get it so it lasts longer? All those type of things. How can we get it so it penetrates the lungs better? So that they're at that stage where they're trying to narrow down the leads right now. At the same time, that's going to take a while, right? And so that's a long-term play. So what can we do in the meantime? There's two things in particular I think that could help in the short run. Part of these would be thinking about other trials, things that might help, existing medicines that might help with non-tuberculous mycobacteria. And I mentioned some of those yesterday. One of these things is gallium, which is another unusual type antibiotic that may be making a difference. There's also a couple of other ones that we've are basically going to put into a network which we're now forming to try to test NTM medicines. Okay, and so traditionally a lot of the NTM work has gone on at Denver. That's one, and then the other one is at the NIH. Those are the two big places. So we've actually made a commitment to Jerry Nick and his program at Denver to say, let's take what you've learned and actually develop some NTM expert centers for CF around the country. They'll do standard of care. They'll be able to be the ones who test some of these new medications. So this will be something that's actually happening this year. They're going to pick those sites. And the whole idea is we need to, yes, be thinking about the screening for long term, but also we need to be testing some things which are already approved drugs to see if they could help now. So it's a two-pronged approach. The sexy part is in some ways the Gates Foundation because it sounds cool, right? But I think the most immediate potential benefit would be this network where we start testing some of these other drugs which are either already approved or already available to make a difference. While we're talking about difficult to treat infections, I would just say that there's the ones that we always, whenever we meet with these companies, and again, it was about 130 companies last year, if they start talking about they want to develop new antibiotics, we have a little list. We say, here's our magic list. We're interested if you hit these. So one of it would be dramatic new Pseudomonas therapy, right? Because we could always use better Pseudomonas, particularly resistant Pseudomonas. NTM, abscessus, max, another one. The other ones always on the list are Burkholderia cepacia, right? Because that's one that we still need better therapies for. Another one's something called Achromobacter. Some of you may have heard about it. This is a difficult to treat infection. I hate it when our patients get it. It's not as sensitive, sort of the typical. And then lastly, we still would like to get that next real good treatment for MRSA. That's probably, we do at least have some therapies for that, but we always run this list with people because we realize even though they're not common, they're really important. And there are a couple of interesting things. We're supporting a French company right now that has very good activity against Achromobacter and against cepacia. And it's an inhaled medicine, so they're trying to, basically it's definitely strong enough to kill the bacteria. We just want to make sure it's not too strong when you inhale it, which is what they're trying to do. The gallium has multiple opportunities there. And we're always on the lookout for additional weapons to attack those infections. So, does that answer your question? Great, thanks. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Trudy, and my son Thomas is 23, and he was actually on the 661-107 that got cut. And I have two questions. One is they're doing the new study for the next gen. Is that drug plus another drug? Is that what that is?
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the first question.
And the second question is he has to go to LA he lives in Nevada. He has to go to LA to get on the studies because they don't do them there. And it got held up so long at Children's LA so that by the time he got the call that he could go do the dosage study, he had one day to get there or they were closing it. Is there any way to work where that could go smoother? Because he's also working supporting himself.
Yes.
And it's kind of a difficult situation.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's any way that could be made speedier so that because he really wants to he's very compliant.
Sure, no, absolutely.
If he doesn't have time.
Yes. So let's do one question at a time. So I think the first one, the question was, remember yesterday we were talking about 661 or tezacaftor, right? It had the new trial results and how there's like several different trials. It's sort of number soup, right? 661, 106, 107, 108, 109, very confusing. The 106 is the one for delta F508 homozygotes. The 107 was the one with just one F508 del, and the other would be something that would be a stop mutation, where you don't make any protein. that unfortunately, that 107 with just one mutation, they have a safety board that continues to monitor the results as it goes along to say, is it strong enough to keep, does it have any evidence that it's going to really work? And the answer is, when they got about 2/3 of the way through the trial, they looked and they said, you know what, it's not going to be strong enough. So, okay, well, so that's great. And so that's interesting.
His lung function say
Yeah.
exacerbation less
Yes.
a little bit. But 10 pounds is a lot.
That's a lot. And here's the other thing is, you remember that can be a little bit frustrating on that, is that there's always some people who have amazingly good response. Unfortunately, what the FDA says is it's going to be good enough to be approved as a drug for everybody. And that's where it gets a little frustrating, right? Because if you're a child or if you're responding, you say, hey, what about me? Here's the one good news about this, that when they said, hey, we're going to stop that trial, it wasn't, hey, we're going to take this and we're going to throw it away. Truthfully, what it was is, say, we're going to start focusing on the next. This combination by itself is probably not going to be as strong as we want it. So what we're going to do is do exactly what you said. Take those two medicines, tezacaftor and ivacaftor, and we're going to add that third drug, that next generation drug, and start that trial. Go ahead and get that trial started. So there are actually 4 different trials right now, taking that combination that your son gained 10 pounds on and adding another drug. One of those is Vertex 440. One's 152, one's 659. The other one I'm blanking on right now. But what we're going to see is that, remember I showed you that slide yesterday, which looked at that 1 + 1 = 5. This is exactly what those 2 drugs plus this third are doing. It's the 1 + 1 = 5 in the dish. So, I don't want to say your son's going to gain 70 pounds. That might be a little excessive, but the answer is, the reason they're moving on is because they know they want it to be stronger. So it's the same 2 drugs with some other ones added. These are early trials. They're only about a month or so. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out which of those 4 next generation medicines, maybe which of 2 of those 4 are going to work best, are best tolerated, right? We've always been very blessed because we haven't had a whole bunch of these modulator trials where we say, oh, there's so many side effects, we have to throw it away. But we always have to go through the safety part, look at the dosing, and then they'll pick 2 probably, and this is Vertex now, so that's not our choice. They'll pick 1 or 2 and say, these are the most promising, and then they'll actually have a longer trial, which will start to look like the trial he was just on. And so hopefully that, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic there. I'm not saying, hey, someday. This is actually, it's going on. To answer your question about the enrolling in trials, this is where the work that Christina Roman and Ali Sue and Patty have done with the Clinical Trial Finder can be so helpful. You're right that when you're enrolling in a trial, you're a little bit at the mercy of whether or not your center is able to sort of move through the approval process and get the trial started, because sometimes they're going fast. I think the truth is, if there's ever a situation where you feel like, uh-oh, this is dragging on, you can go to the Clinical Trial Finder and actually look at all the sites, and it actually tells you the status, right? What are the different statuses for the centers? Do you remember?
It's soon to be enrolling and enrolling.
Yeah, so it'll say soon to be enrolling, or it'll say enrolling. It lists all the places that are doing it. So I think if you looked at there and everybody else in that list is enrolling and your site is just saying soon to be enrolling, I would have a heart-to-heart with your team and say, how close are we? Am I worried about getting shut out?
So he's already being referred.
Yeah.
He's already being referred.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess the other question then would be, truthfully, are there other people on the list? Are there other sites on the list that would be a match? Yeah. Yeah, and
our sites are very open to referrals.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And part of this was trying to enable people with CF and their families to be able to look at what's going on, to play a part of that process, so that if you say, oh, you know what, Utah's doing this, and this may actually be a better fit, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. And we're all in this together. That's part of it. So, I don't know, Patty or Ali Sue, do you have any comments about the clinical trials part and referrals, or sharing of patients? It's not the typical thing, but I think it's really essential to progress.
A long time ago, most studies were done at most sites, but now as we approach 50 open trials, it's impossible for every site to do every study. So we have encouraged sites more and more to do referrals. The Trial Finder has made referrals tremendously easier. You don't have to wait for your care physician to make you aware of a trial at another site. You can actually get on the tool and search on your own and find that trial, which is fantastic. So referrals are occurring more now than ever before. Sites are open to them now more than ever before, so that there's never confusion. Your care center always remains your care center. When you're sick or when you're having your regular quarterly visit, you go to your care center, but the research site will be responsible for the study. It's a system that seems to work for many people. And in case you don't know, most studies will pay for travel and make it quite convenient for you. At least we don't want travel to be why you couldn't participate. So we remove that barrier, right?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say to your point about being notified, 24 hours in advance or whatever the time frame was, and that just being so impossible. I think we're definitely aware of what a terrible experience that can be. We spend so much time emphasizing things like this new awareness campaign where we're trying to teach people that research is important. And, how awful is it when you already know it's important and you're ready and willing to be in a trial, and then that opportunity is denied and it's out of your control. So I think from our perspective, we are definitely going to do everything that we can to make sure that as we're putting the word out about research, and there's so many more trials coming through the pipeline, that we're doing our best to make sure that sites are, not dropping the ball on their end. And not every site that does studies is part of the TDN network that Patty supports, but I think we're going to make a broader, more sweeping effort moving forward to support every site that's doing research, especially the ones in the TDN, but not just those. Every site that does a study is going to be part of this new campaign, for example, where as much as we're going to be equipping the community with the resources you need to look up trials and find one that you're interested in, we're also going to be equipping those care teams to make sure that when you are ready to be in a trial, they make that possible for you.
All right, why don't we move to the next? Any other questions? I want to make sure if you showed up there, you get a chance to get your question answered. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm asking this right, but so both my children have CF. I'm from northern Kentucky, greater Cincinnati area, and they each have a single copy of F508del, and I'm 99%, I don't know what the other mutation is, but it's a stop mutation, I'm pretty sure.
It's a stop mutation?
Yeah. So if they're doing these trials for, the single copy, is it restrictive? Do they check? Like, is your other one a stop mutation? Is your other one a nonsense mutation? And if it's, if they find something that works for single copy, will my kids be able to try it, or will they be restricted?
No, so that's a great question. So I'm going to repeat it, because this is what gets confusing. And truthfully, this infographic that Ali Sue's been working on, we talk about the classes and mutations. It'd be nice to get that out, because that helps with this. Because it is confusing. Did you go to medical school? Okay, you don't need to feel bad about it then. The bottom line is, if you have one F508del, the approach does, sort of what your therapy will end up being, does depend a lot on what the other mutation is. So it is worthwhile knowing. But if an easy way to think about it is it one of these ones that doesn't make any protein? Okay, and there's a couple different ways. Sometimes that can be a chromosomal deletion. Sometimes that can be a stop mutation. It's one of the ones that says, okay, really, there's not going to be any protein made from that side. It's really just the F508del. The answer is, if your children, if there's a therapy, for instance, this triple combination that's shown to be beneficial for people with just one F508del, your children that's perfect for them. Right? Because you don't need anything on that other allele, that other chromosome. You just need the one F508del. And so that's the reason why we really feel like that has a chance to transform, because 86% of all people with CF have at least one F508del. Now, it gets a little complicated, because if you have something on the other side that is not a stop, or it makes protein, then you start thinking, oh, could we treat that side as well somehow? And that's when you start thinking about, okay, are there other combinations? The nice thing is, as long as we can come up with something that's strong enough for the one F508 del, all you're going to do is get extra bang for the buck on the other side, right? That's why we really view that as our next big target. Does that answer your question? So hopefully good news. You should be encouraged about that. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
I guess this is kind of a comment. We actually were just awarded one of the last TDN centers from the last group.
Yes, great.
So very exciting.
Where are you from?
I'm South Florida.
Oh, very good.
DiMaggio.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, good.
So I guess, with one of the latest Vertex studies, we had a patient come in, so excited, and ends up being a screen failure. But there wasn't, you guys weren't looking for it wasn't a large study anyway, which could have been why, your son may have found out so late. Because if you're not looking for a lot of patients, everybody wants those Vertex studies, and so it didn't work out for us, but it didn't work out for your son either.
Yeah. So I think a couple of key points here, because you're right, and Ellie soon said this for sure. It's frustrating if you want to be part of something and you feel like you're not. For one thing, as Patty mentioned, with over 50 trials, it's impossible to have every site do everything. As a matter of fact, it'd be a disaster. They would just spend all their time doing paperwork. What we want them to do is to spread out some of those studies so that they can focus on enrolling and getting the trials done. The early studies, particularly for these next gen, they tend to be smaller, right? Because what you're figuring out is really, is it safe? What's the right dose? So you just look for a month. You look quick. It's when you start getting a little bit further on, when you start saying, hey, we need bigger numbers. And so what I would say is there's 4 different trials. You can look at the Vertex 440, 152, look around if you really want to be part of those, but realize it's going to be short. They're going to pick one of those or 2 of those, and there's going to be the next round of those. And those will be longer. Those will require bigger numbers. And then the truth is eventually there'll be a phase 3, and that's oftentimes over 1,000 people with CF, right? So that'll be one of the big ones where we're going to need as many hands on deck as possible. The other thing I'll mention is that right now Vertex is ahead, but there are several other companies that have agents that look just as promising or more promising in the dish than what Vertex has right now. And we wish Vertex all the success in the world, because that means that our people with CF are getting better. But at the same time, we want to make sure that all the best potential medicines get a chance to advance. And so keep your eyes open, particularly if right now you're saying, okay, this one short trial, I can't get in that. There may be likely some other modulator trials that look very exciting. And or even some of the other things that we talked about yesterday, other type of things. So the whole point of this is hopefully there'll be something for just about everybody. And then obviously for people that don't fit into some of the modulators, we're trying to focus on finding new leads for some of the stop mutations. Other approaches that don't matter what genotype you have, such as the ENaC inhibitors that I showed you yesterday. And so hopefully there'll be something that you feel like, okay, this makes sense for me. That's what we'd like. Okay. Yeah,
I have a question, Mike.
But you have all the answers usually.
Nope.
No.
It is really hard on everyone when there's a screen failure, but it's probably hard to know how very common that is in CF research. So what's the percentage of screen failure in CF clinical trials?
Is this a quiz?
Yes, it is.
I don't know, fill me in.
My understanding, it's around 30%. 3 in 10, sometimes 40%. So for a lot of reasons, our patients have a lot of symptoms, and they then, beyond just the regular huge amount of symptoms, they get sick and have more symptoms frequently, and we can't enroll them if they're having more symptoms. It's not safe, and it's not smart. So I know it feels so bad as a research coordinator, and it definitely feels bad as a parent when the person you love screen fails. But just know it's very, very common, and it's completely unavoidable. There's nothing we can do, and there's nothing you can do, but we can't push forward because it's not smart and it's not safe.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Klum from Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm here. My sister's listening. My niece is in Chicago. She's just a year old, so we're really, really new on this journey. And when you asked if she had been to medical school, none of us have been to medical school, so we're swimming in clinical trial soup. Is there something that you guys are working on that says, like, what the hell is a phase 1 clinical trial? What is a phase 2? So you're talking about, like, the trial finder, and we've looked at it and we're like, awesome, but like we're in kindergarten before the clinical trial finder. And so what do you have out there for that? And I think from my sister's experience and from our family's experience, we haven't found it easily. If it's there, maybe you're working on it and that will be the answer, but we haven't found it easily, and so we're like, oh, we know this is the future and we know this is the savior, but what the heck is this?
Thrown into the deep end.
I'll just start by giving you sort of an overview of how the information on cff.org is structured, because it is, if you're coming into it completely new, pretty overwhelming. And we do our best to give you an entry point to that information, but I totally get that, like, a lot of stuff gets buried, and even if it is on the website, it's not easy to find all the time. And then even once you get there, you know, it may not be presented in a format that is easy to understand. Different people learn different ways. So,
come on in, guys.
The first thing I'll say is I personally am a visual learner, so something I'm really excited about is that we've created a few new infographics that are available both on the website as PDFs, so you can download them, and then they're also available for care centers to order in hard copy, so they can pass out those infographics in clinic, but they go over topics like the phases of research. So what is a phase 1 trial? How many people nationally enroll in a phase 1 trial? What is being studied? How does that differ from a 2 or a 3 or a 4? Where does the FDA come into that? So that is presented both on a web page in like an article format, with paragraphs written out on cff.org, as well as in that infographic. Same thing with the layers of safety. When you decide to join a trial, how are you protected? What's being looked at? When can you withdraw from a study? The answer is anytime, by the way. Things like that we know can be confusing and very dense. So we're doing our best to present them in a user-friendly way. And we're always looking for feedback on how we can do that better. But what I will say is that if you go to cff.org and you hit research, which is one of the tabs across the main menu on the top, and you go to clinical trials, the way it's broken down on the page, the first section is Clinical Trials 101. So that would be where you would want to start information about research. What is it? What is a trial? What does that word even mean? And then it goes into information you would want to know when you're actually ready to think about enrolling in a trial. And then the last section is information you would want after you've participated in a trial and how to follow up with, you know, what happened to that drug I was on, what happened to the study. So I hope that helps a little bit.
If not, email Alex Who. So I know we're probably over on this session. So why don't we wrap up? If you didn't get your question answered, hang out, and you'll be the first person to get your question answered next. Thanks for suggestions. Please let us know. We want to keep trying to get better. We're really grateful for all of your interest in clinical trials, and look forward to talking about new things next year.